Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is a rather frequent flyer on the show, Jen Barrett, the Orleans County State's Attorney. She's here today to talk about what is going on in the courthouse. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Do we have any crime?
Absolutely none.
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 So since we don't have any crime, I guess that's the end of our show. We're coming out of COVID now, and the COVID years are really tough for you as a state's attorney, and it probably was actually tough for victims, and even it was tough probably for people who have committed crimes and who just wanted to put it behind them. Now, is that true?
Yeah, I think that the COVID pandemic has really been challenging for everybody in terms of the court operations. I think we talked about it on a previous show, but for 22 months, we didn't have any jury trials, and there was no access to jury trials at all for Orleans County. And since then, we're sort of back up and running. We are trying to do jury trials, but it's at a much smaller scale.
Right.
And some of the larger trials have still had to be transferred out of county.
And how does that work if you're going to have a trial by your peers? Is it the peers in Orleans County that you have to bring to the other county, or is it their peers down here?
So our preference would be to have peers from our own county,
Right.
but the way that they have done it is that it's peers from the county that we're trying the case in.
I don't know. I would think maybe the person being prosecuted would rather try their luck outside of the county, though.
I think it would depend on the case and what the topic is. I think that different cases could be perceived differently in different areas of the state. I think having a juror from Stowe would be very different than having a juror from the Kingdom.
Oh yeah, that's true. Especially, if you're actually trying a deer poaching case, I bet you up here in the Kingdom, some of your jurors are going to look at deer poaching vastly different, say somebody in Stowe or Burlington.
Sure.
You might get a lot more sympathy up here.
I think, well, we have certainly more sportsmen who enjoy the sport of hunting up here, so I think that people would be more aware of people who are gaining an unfair advantage.
I'm still waiting to get on your jury pool. That hasn't happened, but I did, since the last show, I think it was, I did get a notice that I am in the run-in to sit on a jury for, I sent it to you, I think it was the feds, right?
Yep.
And, well, I don't know if my life's going to allow me to do it, but I've been waiting for, I'm 57, I think I could have been called up when I was 18, so I've been waiting that long to actually sit on a jury pool, and I'm waiting for you to send me a slip that I'm going to be on a jury.
Well, the good news for you, Scott, is because of COVID, they are summoning a lot more jurors than normal.
Oh.
So instead of asking 50 people to appear, they ask 200 people to appear, then excuse people who have reasons to be excused because of COVID, medical conditions, and otherwise. So there is a higher probability these days that you could be brought in to a jury.
Well, maybe, yeah, and you know how that'll work.
I wouldn't let you on my jury.
So how have people been dealing with it? The victims really want to put this stuff behind them usually. Are they getting impatient?
Absolutely, and rightfully so. So victims also have the right to a speedy trial in the same way that a defendant does. And we have a number of cases that are very old. They were old before the pandemic, and they're very old at this point. And some of those cases are really serious, and cases that are really serious with profound impacts on the victim. Okay. And so we still have aggravated sexual assault charges on minors that are from 2016. And that's an incredible amount of time to have something pending for a victim and not know when it's going to resolve or how it's going to resolve.
And you probably and in that time, I suspect maybe you've lost witnesses to death or different people. Is that the case? Have you lost people or people moved away?
Absolutely. We have had victims die during the pandemic. We've had people who've moved and we haven't been able to locate them. In a good year, people move and change cell phone numbers. That's relatively frequent. Now imagine that we've put a 22-month delay in cases that were already a year or two old. Certainly people have moved and moved on and are frustrated about the prospect of having to come back and deal with a case.
And what is the obligation of law enforcement after they retire? Do they have to come back as well?
So that is also something that we are dealing with. Is there is a large population of law enforcement in the area that have retired in the last 2 years and moved out of state. A lot of people leave the state of Vermont sort of for obvious reasons that relate to taxes and otherwise when they're done with their careers. And so in order to get them back, we have to treat them like civilians. So there's no obligation under their contract or as part of their previous employment for them to come back. And so we have to beg them or subpoena them or sort of choose how we bring them back. And then if we're bringing someone back from out of state, we, as the state's attorney's office, is obligated to pay for their travel expenses, a hotel, mileage, meals. And so that adds a burden to the taxpayers once law enforcement has retired.
Right. You were talking about some cases are old. I was reading one that your decision has even made USA Today news and some other large media outlets to I don't know if the word is murder, what you're charging him with, but about a local man who shook his baby. Well, he denies it, but shook his baby when she was a month old, was charged for that, convicted, correct?
Yes.
But now, 15 years later, 15 years from the episode, the then 15-year-old girl died as what I think the doctors are saying is a direct result of the abuse she received 15 years previous, correct?
That's right.
And so what is he being charged with now that his daughter has died?
So that is the Jason Roberts case,
Right.
and he has been charged with, and the court has found probable cause for a second-degree murder charge. And so what that is saying is that her death was a direct result of his conduct.
That's going to be a hard case, isn't it?
So I think that all homicide cases are complex and challenging, and certainly one of that age will have challenges for both sides.
It seems like, I go way back with covering court in the sense of I did it occasionally when I was with the Chronicle 25 years ago, and just, through different, and then when I served in legislature, I kept an ear on the news, but seems to me like you're getting a lot more serious cases than, well, a lot more of them at least. It seems like you have a lot more murders, and the kind of murders we were getting here for most of the time, they were people who did incredibly stupid things on the spur of the minute. They weren't hits. They were dumb things. But now you're actually getting hits here. You're getting people who are going out and killing people, particularly in the drug trade. Are you seeing more of that get into your courtroom?
So we've definitely seen an increase in violence as it relates to the drug dealing in our community. And I think that is something that we are seeing. And I'm not sure that it's unique to Orleans County, or if we were just not seeing it, we're sort of the last of Vermont to see that. When I came up here about 8 years ago, the second time, but as state's attorney, we weren't seeing out-of-state dealers living in our community. Right. We were seeing our community members traveling out of state to get drugs to feed their addiction. Now we're seeing people from out of state move into our community for the only purpose of dealing drugs. And they're interchangeable and dispendable. So it could be somebody, day one, it's person A, two, it's person B, and they're completely, they can be substituted at any time.
Right.
And what we're seeing with that is sort of violence that correlates to some of the larger cities where these people come from. And so we are seeing a lot of gun violence,
right,
and we're seeing a lot of physical violence as it relates to drug deaths in sort of brazen attacks that we never saw before.
Right. Yeah, because I still even think, even amongst criminals, there were here, or people who found themselves on the wrong side of the law, that a lot of times, even like the drug traffickers and such, the local people, they were not necessarily bad people. They were doing something dumb, they were doing something illegal, but I just somehow think that they don't understand. You might be able to stiff your friend of their pay, not pay their friends, but some of these people who are coming here, they don't seem to like people not paying their debts.
Right. And I think that there are direct reactions for drug debts that are not paid, or some type of arguments that relate out of the drug dealing. And that's what we're seeing. And we have a number of people charged in scenarios like that. And there's certainly cases that we don't even hear about. But there has been a big problem with that.
I know outside of your district, down in St. Johnsbury, I think that whole world will come out in the upcoming trial with the his name was Jerry Ramirez, who did the who was accused of shooting the guy in the parking lot of NVRH. So I think you're going to see some of that come out of there. Do you ever get bored with your job then?
I don't think there's any time to get bored with my job. It's interesting. A lot of people don't know, but we handle everything from fish and wildlife cases to murder. We have, with the backlog, about 1,300 cases pending.
Right.
There's no time to be bored, and it's interesting because we're dealing with different types of cases all the time.
That's what I was asking. You're always dealing with, and then off the topic of legal, and then you had a ringside seat to a piece of history being torn down in recent weeks. The little jail in back of you, the Orleans County Jail. That kind of took everybody by surprise, just out of. Of course, I think that was by design, because I think they didn't want any controversy, so they just got in there, knocked it down, and got it over with. But did that change your view at all? Like, were you overlooking it before, or?
Some of the offices in my space could see that, but certainly we didn't know it was going to get torn down, and I had always wanted to take a tour of it, but never had gotten around to it.
I even mentioned that to you. I even asked you, I said, can you give me a tour of it? Because, as we've said in previous shows, I've lived a lily white life, not even a speeding ticket, no mug shot. I will tell you, though, since the last show, I got in my very first accident, but the person hit me, so I don't know if that counts.
I'm not sure that counts, Scott.
So I'm letting my hair down. But it was, I have written about the history of the jail over the years, and then I think it's the June issue, that the state's historical preservation people were not impressed, because they weren't impressed because it was obviously done in such a way as to make sure nobody really had time to get in the way of it being torn down. So they weren't really impressed by it. Maybe it did need to be torn down, but it sat there for like 30 years unused, and it's kind of like par for the course that Newport does with a lot of its history. It crumbles.
It's too bad. I thought that jail would make a neat restaurant. When I went to law school in Concord, New Hampshire, they have a Margaritas Mexican restaurant that's in an old jail, and I always thought that it would be so neat to add to Newport something similar in that space.
Yeah, because and that's the point. And they say, people say, well, that it was checked into. I don't think it was. I really don't think it was checked into too hard. I think, I just think it was allowed to crumble, and maybe by the time it came down, it had to come down. But it's kind of par for the course. Like when it was put on the Historic Register, National Historic Register in 1984, and it right in there is explained why it's underneath the register with you work in the county courthouse.
No,
you work in the
old federal building.
Oh, the old federal building. All right.
Yeah.
So the county courthouse and the jail were on the same, that these two buildings should be preserved, and so it took people by surprise. So the old federal building, that was back in the day, that was the post office, the immigrations and such, and so that's the building you work in. Okay. So what do you see coming up for the next few months with the court? Now that, your first attempt at having a jury trial ended up with the judge getting COVID right during it. And what did that mean for you?
So that resulted in a mistrial in the case, which means that we have to redo that jury trial. And it was unfortunate because we had gotten through all of the state's evidence, the victim had testified, and we were essentially done. And now we have to redo everything. So that was the first attempt at a jury trial, and not the most successful attempt. But we're slated to pick another set of juries, or jury, depending on what the list gets narrowed down to at the end of the month. Has any cases actually been dropped because of COVID? Yes. I would say at this point it's probably between 20 and 30 cases that have been dismissed for a lack of speedy trial as requested by the defense attorneys and granted by the court.
So if I had decided on a life of crime, the last 2 years would have been a pretty good window for me to do that.
I suppose you could look at it that way.
Yeah. Any other big trials coming up?
So we had a homicide trial that was slated to be tried last month that was just continued. We're hoping that we'll be trying that case relatively soon. That was the Schwartz homicide.
Oh, sure. Orleans.
Yep, and so that is on our radar of something that needs to be resolved. We just sentenced Jennifer Simard in that homicide case, as well as a case that I was covering for Caledonia, the Alan Draper homicide.
Okay, yeah.
And so we're starting to wrap up some of the more serious older cases.
You got a newer one coming up, I would suspect. I don't know what the charge are, but it occurred right on the very fringe of your district. I know it started in Hardwick, which is out of your district, but I think the death actually occurred in Greensboro? The one that started at the store.
Yes, that case is pending.
Oh, so that has anything been?
No major developments. It has been charged, and so it's sort of in the boring discovery process right now.
Right. Oh, so at that phase, might it not come up then, or?
No, it will. It's just sort of at the phase where the defense attorneys are doing all of their work.
Right. So, and then I assume you're going to have one that came out of the shooting of the mother and son in Holland.
So that case has been filed. The defendant is incarcerated in the state of Connecticut, so we're waiting for those charges to be completed.
Boy, as I said, it sounds to me like, and looking back, it sure sounds to me like you have a lot more murder cases than. Do you know what the statistics are? Are murders going up?
I don't know the specific statistics for Orleans County. I know that we have had a decent chunk since I've been in office. I think that we've probably had approximately one a year since I took office, which is a lot for a small office. And when I worked in Bennington, we didn't see a murder the entire time I was there, and that's a much larger county.
No, it just seems like a lot. So how is your staff hanging in there with all the changes because of COVID?
So they're doing really well, and I think I dare to say I have one of the best staffs in the state. I have some experienced attorneys now who've been with me for 3+ years. I have great victim advocates who've been with the state for a long time, and admin. Some of the COVID relief money is allowing us to hire a legal assistant, so they'll help go through some of the older cases to try to see if there's a way to resolve them without court intervention. And I'm hiring a 4th attorney.
Right. When does it look like you're going back to as business as usual?
I think we're slowly moving in that direction, but I think that business as usual, like in a lot of professions, will look different in 2022 than it did in 2020. And so I think that the court will continue to do a lot of the hearings remotely. I think it's more efficient with the incarcerated defendants for non-evidentiary matters for them to be able to appear from jail versus coming in and out and being transported for a couple of minutes for hearing. But I'm hoping that we'll be able to do more hearings and more jury trials to help alleviate the backlog. I've been in communication with the court, offering my unsolicited opinion about ways to deal with the backlog, which I think is a big problem, and there needs to be a specific plan in place to address it, so that we don't end up with more pending cases.
Right. And in the meantime, it'd be kind of nice if people would stop committing any form of crime to at least let you get caught up.
That'd be great. If we could just take a couple months sabbatical from all crime, that'd be lovely.
Do you know, I've heard a lot of statistics about COVID, like different things, like America's weight went up and such, they actually gained weight during COVID. Do you think, have you seen any correlation? Did people commit more or less crimes during COVID?
So I think that there were less crimes charged during COVID. I don't think there was less criminal activity, but there was a period of time where law enforcement was not actively looking for proactive work. And so they would respond to calls, but they weren't out stopping cars or enforcing the traffic laws or really looking for things. So those types of cases dropped in the 2020, 2021 years. I also think that child sex abuse was underreported in the last 2 years because children who don't have access to safe individuals outside of the home don't have anybody who's watching and able to check in for them to make that disclosure to. So we saw a big drop in the number of child sex cases that were reported.
What about domestics? Because I would think domestics, the last couple of years could get kind of stressful.
So I think that they held pretty steady. I don't think we saw a large uptick or a drop in domestic violence related cases.
Right. All right, we only have a few more minutes left. What more would you like to talk about with life in the courthouse? Oh, you do have an election coming up this fall too. Why are you elected?
I have no idea, Scott. It's a interesting position to have as an elected position. Certainly my job in a lot of ways is not political at all, and it really has nothing to do with my views on politics as we understand them, right? And so, yes, it's an election year. I'm collecting signatures for my petition, and I will be running again, and that will be kicking off this summer.
Do you get, if somebody signs it, is that one free get out of jail? Is that like a get out of jail pass or?
No, Scott, you don't get any benefits for endorsing my petition.
Yeah, it seems so strange, and I don't know the history. It's kind of like electing the sheriff. It's you run for election, and I'm sure it goes way back, and it goes way back in time. But talking about your office, I was really glad that you made it through COVID, because I wrote an article using an old newspaper clipping that your predecessor in I believe 1918 did not survive the Spanish flu. He held your seat and he died.
Well, I'm glad history did not repeat itself, Scott.
Yeah, so, okay. Any final parting words?
I don't think so. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll have to have you on again, and I know here's my prediction for the upcoming race. You probably don't want to hear
don't
this.
Don't jinx me, Scott.
No, I think you've proven yourself. You know, you took over a courthouse. You took over a position that was struggling. You've brought credibility and respectability back to it, and I think people are going to, you know, even people who disagree with you, yeah, there's probably a couple of them. I think most, they think you're fair.
And that's what I strive to be, is fair. Certainly I work hard in my position, and I think that I have demonstrated my capabilities over the last 8 years, and I look forward to continuing to serve the people of Orleans County.
I think you once told me, too, that you've even had people or family members. I remember particularly there was that big roundup of opiate users and dealers, and I think you even got some thank yous from the family for bringing for helping change the lives of their loved ones, but you know, they may have not appreciated it at the time, but it was probably a life-changing moment for some of those people to be rounded up.
Yeah, we certainly do get thank yous from places that you might not expect, and sometimes it's from the people themselves who've committed the crime, and they describe how the interruption by the criminal offense has changed their lives. And it's funny, I get fairly regular mail from the jail from some of the inmates, and even some of them have thanked me for saving their lives as it relates to addiction. I even got a Christmas card this year from one of the inmates.
Oh, well, that's good. I bet you've been told off too, though.
Oh, not all the mail is as kind,
no.
but...
Okay, well, thanks for coming on. We'll have to have you back on. Hopefully our next show will be just saying how no crime in Orleans County.
We'll look forward to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Scott.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.